it's often been said that you back founders or teams as opposed to the startup itself. I have found this to be true.
Our featured speaker today is the head of projects at Prolog Projects and founding managing partner of Preventures Capital. Tadeo, it's a great pleasure to have you join us as our featured speaker today. Thanks so much for being willing to share your journey with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me as well. I really appreciate it, Nancy and Spencer.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure to have you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. In terms of my voyage and a bit of self discovery, I've worked in corporate most of my life, probably about 22 decades in the corporate world. One of the issues that I've discovered is just that transition, that sometimes there's a need to transition from a corporate to an entrepreneurial journey. Having said that, I've been based originally from Zimbabwe and am based in South Africa and have been for the last 10 years or so. As Nancy highlighted, I run Prolog Projects, which is a projects and services company, as well as more recently Ventures Capital, which is a VC fund operating on the African continent, as well as an accelerator program to help entrepreneurs set up their startups and do something great on the African continent. I guess that's the brief introduction. Maybe we can then go into the questions, Nancy and Spencer.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I see that you have, quite the balance of experiences. Right now, I know we kind of caught you almost mid-workday. I was wondering if you might detail a little bit more of some of your experience growing up, and if there were some early life events and mentors that influenced your personal and professional development, maybe helped you decide which career choices to make.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of I like I highlighted, I've spent most of my experience, most of my working life in a corporate environment. Having said that, I one of the key people who were influential in my life and possibly my entrepreneurial voyage was when I worked for a family-owned business, and in that, a family-owned business who was an entrepreneur, a flexible packaging company, a manufacturing company in Zimbabwe for the first 4 years. He had he influenced my journey in quite a few areas. In that he set up his the manufacturing company over a period of 10 years, scaled it up to the point of being acquired by a multinational company. So I learned quite a lot from that. I learned things, what to do and what not to do. One of the other areas that really influenced me, I guess I'm giving my age away, was during the dot-com boom, and this was just after working for the family-owned business. I helped to run an internet cafe and business center for once again a family, and I learned quite a lot. And one of the things that then happened was that as he decided to divest from that business, and so I offered to purchase it, and I learned quite a bit of the acquisition skills and how to run a small business and look at how to scale that up. Unfortunately, the acquisition did not go through. There were two parties. They then favored the other party, but I learned quite a lot in that experience. I had a discussion with a VC firm and a bank on how to structure taking over the organization and so on. With more recently, I've worked with, I've been involved in mentorship of entrepreneurs, and maybe just going back to the corporate world. When I was in the corporate world, I was responsible for a hotel supplies, a hotel chain, which had and I was involved on the supply chain side. And as a result of that, I would work with quite a lot of suppliers, emerging suppliers, to developing them. And that kind of exposed me to working with entrepreneurs and mentorship of entrepreneurs. I guess later on we'll talk about a bit about mentorship, and that's where I discovered my passion. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, Tadeo. That's so interesting to hear. I think the skills that you learnt about like acquiring companies has to be fascinating, but also incredibly complex. One thing I wanted to ask about was what prompted your interest in the bootcamp program, and have you found any of the tools from the disciplined entrepreneurship framework particularly useful?
So I've always had an interest in MIT being one of the top engineering university in the world. So I think when the MOOCs were started operating and being put on the web is when I got involved. I think the MIT Open Courseware. So I used to study or to use the notes from the MIT Open Courseware quite a bit, and I think it was because of that connection that I then discovered the boot camp. But one other issue, once I got the invitation, was what really attracted me was this deep immersion over a very short period of time, around 5 days, in a foreign country with in a very diverse environment with entrepreneurs from literally from all over the world.
I can 100% identify with your answer, and I continue to find the principles helpful, but connecting with that network, it has been so meaningful, and I'm glad to hear that it has been for you too.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. So just going back to Spencer's question about what were some of the principles that I picked up, just the primary issues like primary market survey. I think for me was quite an important principle picking up from the boot camp, and also one of the key things that I remember from Bill's presentation is that you do not have a business and up to the point that you have a paying customer, and I think that's one of the enduring things that I have always learned, and I impart on some of the entrepreneurs that I mentor as well. Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, you make a really good point. And actually, just before the discussion, a few of us were sort of talking about where we are in our own entrepreneurial journey, and some of us are at that point, at that juncture, trying to just prove our market and get those first paying customers. It's exciting and also a little bit scary, I think. But I appreciate you really sharing that about your experience. I was actually wondering if you could uh, describe how Proventure's Capital is about identifying and funding African startups that you feel have the potential to transform Africa. I think that's a lofty but amazing goal.
Yes, it is. I have to say right off the bat that one of the inherent things about the African continent, possibly from the disadvantage that there is a high unemployment rate. So you often find that the level of entrepreneurship in Africa has been recorded to be the highest in the world. Having said that, one of the biggest challenges is that the type of entrepreneurship is really survival entrepreneurship as opposed to high growth ventures or IDEs, as to use Bill Olet's terms. So, from when we look at entrepreneurs in Africa, there are usually three key issues that we look at. The first one is traction. That's fairly common. That's something that is similar both in a typical, let's say, Silicon Valley model as opposed to compared to the African continent. So there has to be traction. The startup and the founders have to have an understanding of the market, and the product market fit. The second issue, which is quite important as well, are the teams. Who are the founders in the startup? It's often been said that you back founders or teams as opposed to the startup itself. I have found this to be true, both from a personal point of view and from the startup's point of view. You often find that how the understanding, the knowledge of the founder members and how they work together. As entrepreneurs, we understand that a startup and teams, almost you can compare them to a marriage. A good team goes far, but when there is no chemistry, not so much. To go back to an African proverb, they say that if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go with someone. So teams are very important. The third important issue is really the size of the market. What are they addressing, and what is the size of the market? What's the total available market? The term, to go back to some of the bootcamp terminology that we picked up. So I would say those are the three key issues.
Absolutely. And I think one of the, amongst what you've just said, I think it's so important to have a team that is cohesive together. Would I be able to ask, do you have any sort of criteria by which you determine if a team has chemistry, or how do you tell this is a team that's working together well, this team might have difficulties? How do you sort of tell that kind of thing from your perspective?
Like I pointed out, the chemistry is often important. How they work together as a unit. Another important issue is diversity. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, one of the startups I'm dealing with decided to introduce a lady as a founder, and one of the areas, I was quite excited and encouraging them, because in diversity you get diverse points of view. You become quite stronger. So diversity is very important. But I would say also domain knowledge is quite important. Once again, just to go back to one of the startups I work with in the portfolio is involved in agrotech. He has a background in agricultural engineering, but also a passion for agriculture, and you find that translates into the way he thinks, and so on. So that's the thing. But another important issue as a team is their ability to listen to each other. There's a lot of humility that comes in startups. Sometimes you might fail, and you have to be able to listen to voices of founders, more importantly voices of mentors, and so on. So I would say those are some of the key issues. It's not those are not exhaustive, but I would say those are the core points in founders.
I appreciate that. I know there's no, perfect recipe for a team, but I really appreciate you kind of outlining what you've seen work and maybe not work as well. We can take away from that. I know you're really passionate about empowering African entrepreneurs, and I think that's amazing. I was wondering if you could actually talk somewhat about your work with Acro Capital Accelerator Program. So from my understanding, it's a digital accelerator for tech startups originating from townships, but I'd love you to kind of detail how it actually works.
Yeah, sure. So I realize this is a diverse audience. So a township from an African perspective, maybe the equivalent in the US might be close to the projects, coming from a project, or perhaps a high density area. Previously, another way of looking at it is really looking at founders from a previously disadvantaged background. So that's what the program is about, working with startups, with founders from a previously disadvantaged background. The tech aspect of it is really, in whatever they look at, is having a backbone or a technology as an enabler. Just to give you one of the examples of one of the founders, is that within the townships, he works with, in South Africa we call them spaza shops, or in other areas they might call them tuck shops, but these are home shops that are usually very small, but service the economy. And what he is doing is acting as the supply chain, or setting up a supply chain, supplying those shops. They play an important role in the sense that your day-to-day groceries, it's almost like a 24/7, but much smaller. So he supplies those convenience shops with the day-to-day groceries. But what he's looking at is developing it into a network, and harnessing that technology to better service that startup. So I would say in a nutshell that is it. It's a cohort of about, last year we had a cohort of 30 startups in the program. I've got to say that it's really exciting, highly rewarding. There have been quite a few startups that have come from there, that have gone on to get funding, to scale their startups. Yeah. So that's in a nutshell. That's what the Acro Township Accelerator program is about.
That's excellent, and I feel like that opens up sort of, bringing your mentorship and your team's mentorship opens up a lot of ability to grow for these smaller communities. I was hoping to ask a little bit about sort of the entrepreneurial landscape, obviously in Africa, but in the particular communities that you work amongst. Have you seen them evolve over time? And where would you sort of like them to go in the future? What do you think would be the direction you'd want to push them at the moment?
So Spencer, when you start talking of Africa, you really excite me, and I could talk for an hour on the issue. But I guess the journey of the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Africa begins with the growth in the middle class of Africa. So Africa has got a population currently of 1.2 billion. It's projected to grow to about 1.7 by 2030. There is a growth of the middle class, and that growth in that middle class it equates to an increase in demand for goods and services, and the entrepreneurs are best suited to provide that demand. As that middle class has grown, and also as there has been a proliferation of technology, of the World Wide Web, there's been a democratization of access to internet, to the internet, and so on. It has enabled more and more entrepreneurs on the continent to grow, to be exposed to the rest of the world. So in terms of growth, there has been a substantial growth on the African African continent of entrepreneurs. We've had there's some notable examples of startups, both operating in Africa, operating maybe having come from Silicon Valley and operating in Africa, and having come from Africa. I'm hoping that one of the bootcamp alumni, Munya, is around with Flutterware. That's a really notable example. You've also had startups like Andela. You've got startups in agriculture, perhaps in Kenya, and so on. So there's been that huge growth, and there are spots that are hubs of innovation, very similar to Silicon Valley. Kenya has led the way to a great extent, followed by countries like Rwanda. There is a terminology on the African continent where they call it kings. So it's Kenya, your Ivory Coast, Nigeria, which is huge on tech startups and fintechs, Ghana, and of course South Africa. So there has been a significant growth on the African continent on entrepreneurship, spurred by the rise in the middle class. Going forward, I think there is poised to be huge growth, but there still need to be a lot of work that needs to be done in the background, setting up the ecosystem. There is it tends to be siloed at the moment. There's a need to break down those silos. There's a need to bring in funding. There's so much work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I really appreciate you you sharing that, and I'm sure there's a lot of work to be done, but it's also fascinating to hear about what's happened so far. I think I know I told you already. I've always been fascinated by Africa as a continent because I feel like it is just so amazingly diverse, and I really appreciate your heart to serve people there and to empower their creativity. We actually have a question on that topic from Redmond, and he wasn't sure if his mic was going to be working, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. Redmond says, "Thanks for sharing. Could you talk a little bit about what African entrepreneurs need the most versus founders from other regions and countries? So, is there a significant technology lag or other embedded infrastructure challenge that would potentially hinder development of some startups?"
So, what entrepreneurs need the most on the African continent? I guess the infrastructure is very much lags behind from compared to other continents. Um, be it the technology infrastructure, be it just connectivity, maybe mobility by road, rail, and so on. So there is quite a bit of work that needs to be done. Having said that, in as much as those one could call them voids or institutional voids, they also present an opportunity for Africans to come and fill up those voids and build up that infrastructure. Secondly, I think that as I highlighted earlier on, the ecosystem needs to be further developed. So we tend to lag behind in as far as that ecosystem is concerned. There's a lot of work that really need to be put in to build up a sufficient ecosystem that will support the entrepreneurs on the continent. They are then comes the usual suspects, issues like funding. One of the major challenges on the African continent is that unlike the first world and unlike, let's say, Silicon Valley, you often find that the financial institutions, the mutual funds that are readily available in an American or Silicon Valley setup, the limited partners tend to be risk averse on the African continent. As a result of that, a lot of the funding has usually come from outside, from the US, for example, and also angel investors on the African continent. So we lag behind in terms of that is concerned. The third thing I would like to just highlight is a cohesive policy right throughout. I think we tend to lag behind in as far as that is concerned. There are a few notable exceptions which I've already highlighted. Countries like Kenya, countries like Rwanda, where they have really put up policies that attract investors from both from within and from without the continent. Maybe there are a few other areas, but I would say those are the key ones for now, Nancy.
Thank you so much for the detail of that answer. And actually, Redmond just said thank you as well. I actually have kind of a follow-up question, sort of based off of that one. How do you feel like outsiders such as myself who really, care about the sustainability of, the ecosystem, and the economy in these different African countries, um, I would identify myself sort of, if you divided up in your boot camp and in the different personalities, as the hipster in this situation. But I don't necessarily understand the landscape that you're working with. How would you recommend that those people best help without getting in the way?
So there are quite a few areas that you could actually assist Nancy and someone who is like Nancy. The first point is mentorship. You will find that there are some basic issues from an entrepreneurship point of view that are applicable irrespective of where you are. And you will often find that there are a lot of programs that are on the African continent. If trying to connect, doing it perhaps from a proactive point of view, looking at a startup or a program where you identify with the mission and offering your help. A lot of the experience that you the exposure that you have got would definitely help a lot. The second issue would be from a funding point of view. Perhaps once again actively seeking, but this is going to take a bit of time. It's something that I had a discussion with Redmond regarding earlier on, in that setting up a fund. In our discussion, we called it a diasporan fund, but it might even be, let's just say, boot campers who are passionate about Africa and saying, let's set up a fund and let's look for startups on the African continent whose vision and whose mission we are in agreement with, and then look at investing in those. I would say those are some of the areas, but there's quite a lot that could be done, Nancy. Mentorship, funding are key. Yeah, I'd say those two are the big ones. There are a few other issues as well.
Thank you very much. It's good to hear about like sort of ways that people outside of Africa can assist. But I was hoping to ask you, in your experience, what do you feel aspiring African entrepreneurs need the most assistance with, as in regards to, is it that lack of experience, or what do you think would help them from their perspective the most?
The most in order, maybe the two big issues. The first one that I often find is, now Spencer, this depends on your level of exposure and what you can do. The I would say mentorship is a huge issue. So I would focus on mentorship, but I would also say secondly is funding. I think this is an issue that we've come across as entrepreneurs. Sometimes one would say funding is a big issue, but oftentimes it's more about mentorship, exposure to the what you literally have, getting them to be investor ready. I think that's the one major challenge that we would face if I'm to put myself in that group as African entrepreneurs, being investor ready. The basics, starting with the basics. Do we have our businesses incorporated? Do we have the structures in place? Do we have sound legal advice? Do we have a minimum viable product? Do we have traction? Do we have founders and so on? So I would say that's that's the big issue. The funding, I would say, is the second issue as well.
Thanks so much for detailing that. It's clear that you're an amazing mentor too. Just the way that you put things, I really appreciate the specificity of it. I really love that you're so passionate about helping other people, but I wanted to go back to you for a moment and ask you, has there been a time when you've had to look at your entrepreneurial journey and make a major pivot or completely deviate from your plan? And how did you handle that? And looking back, would you make any changes to that experience?
Yes, Nancy. The big issue, I explained earlier on that most of my working life I have spent in a corporate environment. And I think I really like Steve Blank's explanation about a startup, that it's not a smaller version of a big corporate. It is something that is totally different. And oftentimes we don't realize that when you come from a corporate background, one of the major problems or challenges that I faced is that I had a corporate mentality. When I started my first startup, I was looking at plush offices, having salespeople and so on, instead of literally focusing on a minimum viable product. Make sure that testing the idea, doing a primary market survey, make sure that the idea works. So that was one of the major challenges that I came across when I started off the entrepreneurial journey. And I've got to say it has taken me quite a while to overcome that mindset, and just having a change, a shift in mindset from looking at a startup being a smaller version of a corporate or a big company to what it is to a startup. That I would say is probably the key challenge that I faced.
That's so interesting to hear about. There is such a big distinction in the culture and what to expect from that sort of heavy corporate experience versus startup experience. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about was so if you've been working with a particular group for a time, a particular company, how do you decide, or how do you tell when they have sort of stabilized, when they're at the point where you can sort of let them go on their own, or is there always that mentor relationship?
I think that mentor, firstly, it depends on the startup. It depends on the founders. Some founders, after a period of mentorship, kind of get it and are able to move on their own. Others need a bit of hand holding for a bit of a longer time. In order, how do you determine? I guess it's about the relationship that you have with with the founders, and in order for you to determine whether to continue with them or to let them go. But there is always a healthy relationship from a mentorship point of view that you can have, irrespective of the level of actualization of the founders. They may have a quite a solid team, but I think you will always have that mentorship. And in a way, when you kind of look at it, mentorship and advice can be equated to boards. You, in as much as you will always need a board for an organization, irrespective of whether it's a startup or a big corporate. I guess that mentorship is always needed, but it's perhaps it's the level, the advice that you give, and the direction, the advice and the direction that you give the founders.
I really appreciate that. I think that's excellent advice. I was actually, I know we're kind of running up against the end of the hour. Do you have a little bit more time to continue with a couple more questions?
Yeah, sure. We can go ahead.
And I actually would love to ask you if you have any book recommendations for us. I know I'm catching you off guard with this question a little bit. Um, Even if you don't have them, right at the moment, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, no, not at all. I do have. I've got a couple that I could recommend. For me, the number one book that I've really taken a lot of inspiration from is Zero to One by Peter Thiel. That is, I like the way he thinks. Being, he tends to have a contrarian view to the norm, even the way the whole book starts. The fact that the next, the the next unicorn is not going to be a Facebook. Why? Because it's going to be very different. And there's validation in the things that he says. If you look at, for example, TikTok, if you look at Clubhouse, you will often find that startups are always very different. And what it really focuses there on is to say that it's important not to so much copy what has been done, but to think outside the box, think afresh, come up with something new. The second one is The Power of Habit by I think it's Charles Duhigg. Now, once again, as entrepreneurs, it's often a mindset issue that we overcome. You grow, or not necessarily grow, you overcome obstacles, you overcome challenges a lot because of mindsets, and mindsets which develop into habits. And I like the way Charles Duhigg explains the power of a habit, and how you can reprogram yourself, and how you can change the way you think. I would say those are the two recommendations that I've recently come across, that I would highly recommend.
Thank you so much. So I did want to touch on something that we've touched on in several of these discussions. We've had who voiced, both the challenges and the silver lining moments brought about as a result of the pandemic. Can you talk about, how your business and how your life has been affected, and any difficult decisions you've faced?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Nancy. That is an important point. And once again, just to highlight, there is the expression that you should, words to the effect that you should not waste a good crisis, or a major downturn, a major issue. It's an opportunity, and like you pointed out, or the way you described it, a silver lining. For me, one of the major issues I remember quite clearly in last year, around about February, when the pandemic started hitting the shores of South Africa. Prior to that, I had a vibrant training. Remember, you highlighted the projects, the services part of it, entailed training a lot of technocrats from outside of South Africa, who were physically coming to South Africa to undergo training in hardcore technical issues like project management, supply chain management, quality, and so on. Because that involved face-to-face training, that literally stopped as borders started closing. And that was a huge issue in terms, from a construction, or from a project's point of view. A lot of projects were also put on hold, and that's one of the areas that caused me to pivot more towards entrepreneurial acceleration programs. That's actually how I then got involved with Acro Projects and Acro Capital, sorry, and the fact that it could be an online experience. So you will find that during the 13-week program, the most of the delivery has been done online. There has been um, uh, there has been one or two face-to-face meetings, but predominantly most of the work has been conducted online. So the COVID pandemic really caused me to pivot in that direction. It also enabled me to expose a passion that I have, that of mentorship, mentoring startups, and working with startups in an intense program. Yeah, so I would say that was one of the key issues. But I guess the principle to that is that oftentimes when a crisis hits, when a black swan moment comes, it appears as if the world, the bottom has fallen off, the world has come to an end. But you often find as you go through it that there are opportunities that are presented as a result of that. And I guess that's the whole essence of entrepreneurship.
I think that's very wise words, Tadeo. I think these, as you said, black swan moments are opportunities that people where you can do a lot of good and a lot of amazing things if you properly sort of direct yourself. Now, as we are sort of at the end of the time, I was hoping to ask you a question that we quite often ask. If you had any sort of best lessons or words of wisdom that you'd feel comfortable sharing with us. Treat this more as sort of an open question for you to take as feels right for you.
Um, Wise words. I'm not sure I'm as wise as you are, Spencer, or insightful like Nancy. But one of the things that I've been going through is just maybe outline a philosophy. Once again, Spencer, perhaps you could also send that through to the audience. Brett Feld has come up with a few books that he has written both on ventures and ecosystems and so on. And he's come up with the bolder thesis, where he looks at communities and how startups need to thrive. And the first point he makes is that a thriving ecosystem must be led by entrepreneurs. And he highlights, he uses terminology like there must be leaders and feeders, and the entrepreneurs are the leaders in that setup, and the feeders are everyone else, the legal profession, venture capital companies, accelerator programs, and so on, that feed into the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And then the second one is that you must have a long-term view. Irrespective of the bolder thesis, I think this is something that we need to have as entrepreneurs, and realize that entrepreneurship is more of a marathon as opposed to a 100-meter or a 100-yard dash. A third one is a philosophy of inclusiveness. Diversity really works, and diversity is important from an entrepreneurial point of view. Sometimes it's not intuitive, but it's something that we need to embrace, and as we embrace it, you will often yield great result. I go back to that statement that if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, go with someone, or go with a team. And then the second one is having events that are substantive, not just that are nominal, that really have meaning. Accelerator programs, a support system such as the founders Voyage, for example. I would say those would be my words of wisdom.
Those are all excellent words of wisdom, and you are definitely wise, and you're also quite humble. I think we've all learned a lot in this hour. If you do, I do have one more question from Richard, and then we'll let you go.
Thanks for your presentation. My question is, what is the public support level of startups in your area, maybe in your region overall, versus established corporate brands? Is there any challenge in dealing with the public?
If I'm getting I understand your first part correctly, Richard. I'll answer that, and then just find out from you if I fully addressed it. So in terms of support, I am based in South Africa, and I highlighted earlier on that in terms of countries in Africa that have set up enabling environment for entrepreneurs, South Africa is one of them. Like I highlighted, they call it the Kings, Kenya, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. So it's fairly robust. However, having said that, you often find that in as much as there are resources, but there tends to be siloed. So you will often find that entrepreneurs may not necessarily have direct access or access of what they would like. Compared to established brands, I guess the established brands have better access to those. So you will often find that they are better able or better positioned to have access to the resources that are available. So there are resources that are available on the African continent. Sometimes entrepreneurs do not have access to that. And that ecosystem, setting up an ecosystem almost similar to Bradfeld's Boulder thesis is what is needed on the African continent. I don't know if I've answered your question fully.
No, you have. I appreciate your response, and thanks again for the presentation, Tadeo.
Thanks very much, Richard.
Yeah, thank you for answering all of our questions today. I think that I will definitely have some more for you, but I appreciate you kind of drawing this picture, of what entrepreneurship looks like in your experience in Africa. And I know we have quite a few members of our community that are really as passionate as you are about seeing those ventures, have the meaningful impact that they would like to, and seeing them grow. So we'll definitely continue this discussion. Thank you so much, Tadeo. And again, we really appreciate your thoughts and everything you've shared with us and taught us today. I'd also like to thank everyone for joining and listening and participating and bringing perspective and energy to today's discussion. Spencer and I feel really fortunate to be part of this community, part of a community with you, and for the opportunity to bring this cooperative learning experience to you each week. So we really appreciate your ongoing engagement and your ideas on how we can make it better. We will definitely have some additional events coming up, and we will let you know about that soon. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and I hope you have a great day and evening ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Nancy and Spencer, for the great work you're doing. You guys keep it up. You're doing a great work.
Thank you so much, Tadeo.
Thank you. It doesn't work without you sharing and all the others that have shared, so we really appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Have a great night, Tadeo.
This has been Nancy and Spencer on Founders Voyage Weekly Podcast. Our speaker each week can be reached through our Discord server. Our intro and outro music is from the song Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band. We'll be back again next week for another episode. Until then, have a great day and continue your voyage.